When I came back from the meeting about the will, I saw my photo in the trash and a note from my materialistic daughter. Only family lives in this house now. She had no idea what I had just signed. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The lawyer's office still felt heavy on my shoulders as I fumbled with my house keys. My hands were shaking, not from the autumn cold, but from what I'd just learned. 68 years old, and I was still discovering secrets about my own family. The front door clicked open, and I stepped into what used to feel like home. The silence hit me first. No warm greeting, no smell of dinner cooking. Just the hollow echo of my footsteps on the marble floor that Calliope had insisted we install last year. "It makes the house look expensive, Mother," she'd said, as if that mattered to me. I hung my coat on the brass hook by the door and noticed something was different. The family photos that usually lined the hallway table were rearranged. My wedding photo with Harold was gone. The picture of me holding newborn Calliope had vanished too. In their place sat newer photos, Calliope and Derek at various social events, all smiles and designer clothes. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to walk toward the kitchen. Maybe Calliope was making dinner. Maybe we could have a normal evening for once, where she didn't look at me like I was some burden she'd inherited along with the house. That's when I saw it. My silver-framed portrait, the one Harold had commissioned for our 25th anniversary, sitting in the kitchen garbage can. The glass was cracked, and there was a note taped to the frame. My hands trembled as I picked it up, careful not to cut myself on the broken glass. "In this house. It's only family now." The words were written in Calliope's precise handwriting, the same loops and curls she'd perfected in private school. The ink was fresh. She'd done this today, while I was at the lawyer's office. I stared at the note until the words blurred together. Family, as if I wasn't family. As if carrying her for 9 months and raising her for 32 years meant nothing. As if working double shifts as a nurse to pay for her dance lessons and college tuition had erased my right to exist in this house. "Mother, you're back." Calliope's voice came from behind me, crisp and cold as winter air. I didn't turn around immediately. I couldn't. "I see you found your photo." When I finally faced her, she was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, wearing that cream-colored cashmere sweater that cost more than my monthly medication budget. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her makeup was flawless despite it being nearly dinner time. She looked beautiful and untouchable, like a porcelain doll that might shatter if you held it too tightly. "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Calliope sighed, as if I were asking her to explain simple mathematics to a child. "Derek and I have been talking. This house needs to reflect who we are now. We're building a life together, and frankly, having you here," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "it sends the wrong message to our friends." "The wrong message?" I set the broken frame on the counter, my voice finding strength I didn't know I still had. "I've lived in this house for 34 years, Calliope. Your father and I bought it when you were when Daddy was alive. Things were different." Her voice cut through mine like a blade. "But he's gone now, and Derek and I are the ones paying the bills. We're the ones maintaining this property. We're the ones with a future." Derek appeared behind her then, his tall frame filling the doorway. He had the kind of face that looked trustworthy in bank advertisements, clean-shaven, perfectly groomed, with eyes that never quite met yours directly. He placed a protective hand on Calliope's shoulder. "Mrs. Morrison, we've been meaning to talk to you," he said, using that tone people reserve for explaining bad news to children. "We think it might be time to consider other living arrangements." Other living arrangements. The words hung in the air like a threat. "This is my home," I said, though even as I spoke, I could hear how weak my voice sounded. Calliope laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mother, be realistic. You're living in the past. This house is worth nearly $2 million now. Do you really think it makes sense for one elderly woman to rattle around in all this space?" She gestured around the kitchen as if it were a vast, empty cathedral instead of the room where I'd made thousands of meals, where I'd helped her with homework, where Harold and I had shared quiet morning coffees for decades. "We've been looking at some very nice senior communities," Derek added, pulling out his phone. Some of them have excellent activities. Bridge clubs, book groups. You'd have people your own age to talk to. People my own age. As if I were some ancient relic that needed to be stored away with other dusty artifacts. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and tried to find some trace of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The child who'd cried when I had to work late shifts. The teenager who'd promised she'd always take care of me when I got old. That girl was gone. In her place stood a stranger wearing my daughter's face. "I need some air," I said quietly, walking past them toward the back door. "Mother, we're not finished talking about this," Calliope called after me. But I was already stepping onto the back patio, breathing in the cool evening air that smelled of dying leaves and the approaching winter. Behind me, I could hear them whispering, probably planning their next move in this chess game where I was apparently the piece to be sacrificed. They had no idea what I'd learned at the lawyer's office today. They had no idea about the envelope sitting in my purse or the keys that came with it. They thought they held all the cards, but they were wrong. For the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: hope. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Calliope and Derek's voices drifted through the thin walls. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. Why would they? I was just the old woman taking up space in their perfect life. "The sooner we get her into Sunset Manor, the better," Derek was saying. "My mother looked at 3 places last week. They're all very clean, very professional. I just don't want her making a scene," Calliope replied. "You know how dramatic she can be. Remember when Daddy died? All that crying at the funeral? It was embarrassing. Embarrassing. I'd been embarrassing because I'd cried when my husband of 43 years died. The man who'd held my hand through labor, who'd worked overtime to pay for Calliope's wedding, who'd whispered, 'Take care of our girl,' with his last breath." I pulled the envelope from my nightstand drawer and ran my fingers over the heavy paper. The law firm's letterhead was embossed in gold: Patterson, Wells, and Associates. Mr. Patterson had been my mother's lawyer for 20 years before she passed, but I'd never needed to see him until today. "Your mother was very specific about the timing," he'd said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "These documents were only to be given to you after her first grandchild turned 30. Calliope had turned 32 last month. We'd celebrated with an expensive dinner that I'd paid for, naturally. She'd complained the entire time about the restaurant not being trendy enough." Inside the envelope were 3 items: a deed, a letter in my mother's handwriting, and 2 old-fashioned keys tied with a faded blue ribbon. The deed was for property I'd never heard of: a cottage on Willowbrook Lane, about 40 miles north of the city. According to the papers, my mother had owned it for 15 years before she died, but she'd never mentioned it. Not once. The letter was what made my hands shake. "My dearest Della, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've probably learned some hard truths about family. I bought this cottage the year Calliope was born, after watching how she treated you even as a baby. Some children are born wanting, and they never stop wanting. I saw it in her eyes from the first day. I know you'll think I should have said something sooner, but you needed to learn for yourself. You needed to see who she really was when she thought no one was watching. The cottage has been maintained by the property management company. Everything is paid for through a trust I established. It's small but comfortable, and more importantly, it's yours. No one can take it from you, no matter what papers they wave or what threats they make. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is the chance to face the consequences of their choices. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to walk away. The cottage is waiting for you, whenever you're ready. All my love, Mother." I'd read the letter 6 times since coming home, and each time it felt like my mother was reaching through time to save me. She'd seen what I'd been too blind to see, that Calliope's selfishness wasn't just a phase or a result of being spoiled. It was who she was at her core. The voices next door had shifted to discussing money. They always came back to money. "Once she's out of here, we can finally renovate the master suite," Calliope was saying, "and maybe put in that pool you wanted." "What about her financial situation?" Derek asked. "Does she have enough for the senior home?" Calliope laughed. "She has Dad's pension and Social Security. That should cover the basic package at Sunset Manor. If she wants anything extra, she can figure it out. The basic package. I'd looked up Sunset Manor after Derek first mentioned it. The basic package was a shared room with institutional food and no privacy. The kind of place where people went to disappear. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope with the deed and keys. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I would drive to Willowbrook Lane and see what my mother had left for me. The next morning, Calliope was already dressed and putting on her coat when I came downstairs. She barely glanced at me as she applied her lipstick in the hallway mirror. "I'm having lunch with Derek's mother to discuss the senior home options," she announced. "We should have some good choices by this afternoon." "I won't be here this afternoon," I said quietly. She turned, surprised. "Where are you going?" "Just running some errands." I poured myself coffee with steady hands. "Taking care of some business." Calliope frowned. "What business?" "Mother, you're not thinking of doing anything foolish, are you? Because Derek and I are only trying to help." "Help?" The word tasted bitter in my mouth. "I'm 68, not 6. I can manage my own errands." She studied my face for a moment, and I could see her trying to read my expression. But after 32 years of practicing in front of mirrors, I'd learned to hide my thoughts when necessary. "Fine," she said finally, "but we're talking tonight. Derek found a very nice place that has an opening next month." After she left, I sat in the quiet house and finished my coffee. The silence felt different today. Not empty, but peaceful. Like the calm before a storm that would finally clear the air. I went upstairs and packed a small overnight bag. Just essentials. Some clothes, my medications, the few photos of Harold that Calliope hadn't thrown away. Everything else could stay. Material things had never mattered much to me anyway. The drive to Willowbrook Lane took exactly 47 minutes. The cottage sat at the end of a tree-lined street, surrounded by oak trees that were just beginning to turn autumn colors. It was small and white with blue shutters, exactly the kind of house I'd dreamed of when I was young, before marriage and motherhood, and decades of putting everyone else's needs first. The first key opened the front door. Inside, everything was clean and simple. Hardwood floors, a stone fireplace, windows that let in streams of golden light. The furniture was modest but comfortable. The kitchen was tiny but perfectly adequate for one person. The second key opened a small desk in the bedroom. Inside was another envelope with my name on it, along with a bank book showing a modest but sufficient account balance, enough to live comfortably, if not extravagantly. I sat on the bed and looked around the room. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe deeply. This was mine. Not because someone allowed it, not because I'd earned it through years of sacrifice and service, but because my mother had loved me enough to see what I needed before I knew it myself. My phone buzzed. A text from Calliope. "Derek's mother found the perfect place. Much better than we expected. We'll discuss payment plans tonight." Payment plans, as if my life was just another transaction to be negotiated. I typed back, "I won't be home tonight." Her response came immediately. "What do you mean? Where are you?" I turned off my phone and set it on the nightstand. Tomorrow would be soon enough for explanations. Tonight I just wanted to sit in the peace my mother had given me and plan my next move. Outside the cottage windows, the sun was setting through the oak trees, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. It looked like hope. I woke up in the cottage to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, and for the first time in months, I felt rested. Really rested. Not the exhausted sleep of someone dreading the next day, but the deep peace of someone who'd finally found sanctuary. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Calliope and 12 text messages that grew increasingly frantic as the night progressed. The last one, sent at 2:47 a.m., simply read, "Mother, call me now." I made coffee in the cottage's small kitchen and sat by the window, watching a family of squirrels chase each other through the oak trees. The quiet was extraordinary. No sound of Calliope's heels clicking across marble floors. No hushed conversations about my inconvenient existence. No television blaring shows I didn't want to watch. By 9 o'clock, I'd made my decision. I drove back to the house, my former house, knowing exactly what I needed to do. Calliope's car wasn't in the driveway. Good. That would make this easier. I used my key one last time and walked through the rooms I'd called home for 34 years. Everything looked the same, but it felt different now, like visiting a museum dedicated to someone else's life. I packed methodically. My clothes, Harold's watch, the jewelry box my mother had given me for my 16th birthday, the photo albums Calliope had banished to the hall closet, my nursing school diploma that I'd worked so hard for, Harold's favorite coffee mug, the one with the chip on the handle that he'd refused to throw away. The moving van I'd called arrived exactly on schedule. The two men were efficient and respectful, carefully loading my belongings without asking questions about why a woman my age was moving out of such an expensive house. "That everything, ma'am?" the older one asked as they loaded the last box. "That's everything that matters," I said. I left my house key on the kitchen counter, along with a note I'd written that morning. "Calliope, I've decided to take your advice about finding other living arrangements. You're right that this house should reflect who you are now. Consider this my gift to your new life together. Don't try to find me. I'm exactly where I need to be. Mother." The drive back to Willowbrook Lane felt like crossing a bridge to a new country. As I pulled into the cottage driveway, my phone rang. Calliope's name flashed on the screen. I turned off the phone and left it in the car. The moving men helped me arrange my furniture in the cottage. Harold's reading chair fit perfectly by the fireplace. My grandmother's china cabinet looked at home against the living room wall. The family photos I'd rescued found new places on the mantel and side tables. By evening, the cottage felt like it had always been mine. I made a simple dinner and ate it at the kitchen table while watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. That's when I heard the car doors slamming outside. Through the front window, I saw Calliope and Derek marching up the walkway. Calliope's face was flushed with fury, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled. Derek looked uncomfortable, like a man who'd been dragged into a battle he didn't want to fight. The pounding on my door was aggressive, urgent. "Mother, I know you're in there. Open this door right now." I sat in Harold's chair and continued eating my dinner. The pounding intensified. "Della Morrison, you open this door or I'm calling the police." "For what?" I called back calmly. "I'm sitting in my own home, eating my own dinner." Silence, then whispered arguing between Calliope and Derek. Finally, Calliope's voice again, higher pitched now, more desperate. "Mother, what is this place? How did you even find it?" "It's mine," I said simply. "It's been mine for 3 years." More silence. I could practically hear her brain working, trying to calculate how this changed her plans. "We need to talk," Derek said, his voice attempting to sound reasonable. "Mrs. Morrison, we're worried about you. This is a very sudden decision." I stood up and walked to the door, but I didn't open it. "There's nothing sudden about it. You've made it very clear that I'm not wanted in your life. I'm simply accepting your wishes." "That's not— We never said—" Calliope's voice cracked slightly. "Mother, come home. We can work this out. This is my home now. But what about the house? What about our plans?" There it was. The real concern. Not my well-being, not our relationship, but their plans. "The house is yours, just like you wanted," I said through the door. "I've moved out. Permanently." I heard Calliope gasp, then break into tears. But they weren't tears of regret or love. They were the tears of a child whose toy had been taken away unexpectedly. "You can't just disappear," she sobbed. "What will people think? What will Derek's parents think? They'll think you're adults who can handle your own lives without an elderly woman getting in the way. Mother, please, just let us in. We can discuss this like adults." I almost laughed. Adults. As if throwing my photo in the garbage and planning my exile to a nursing home had been adult behavior. "No, Calliope, we're done discussing. You made your choice when you put my picture in the trash. This is mine." I walked back to my chair and sat down, listening to their continued arguing on my front porch. Derek was clearly trying to convince Calliope to leave, but she wasn't ready to give up. "Fine," she finally shouted. "Stay in your little cottage. But don't expect me to come running when you need help. Don't expect me to visit when you're sick and alone." The threat hung in the air like smoke. She still didn't understand that I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I'd been alone in a house full of people for months. Actual solitude was a blessing in comparison. Car doors slammed again, and I watched through the window as they drove away. Calliope's face was visible in the passenger seat, her mouth moving rapidly as she gestured angrily at Derek. I finished my dinner in peace, then called the phone company to have my number changed. Tomorrow, I would visit the bank to make sure Calliope had no access to any of my accounts. I would register with a new doctor, update my address with Social Security, and begin the practical business of disappearing from their world. As I prepared for bed in my new bedroom, I found myself humming. I couldn't remember the last time I'd hummed. It felt like a sound from another lifetime, when I was young, and believed that love was enough to fix anything. Now I knew better. Sometimes love meant walking away and letting people face the consequences of their choices. Outside my window, the oak trees rustled in the evening breeze, and for the first time in months, I fell asleep without wondering what tomorrow would bring. 3 weeks into my new life, I discovered that my mother had left me more than just a cottage. She'd left me a community. It started with Mrs. Chen next door, who appeared at my front door with a plate of homemade cookies and a warm smile. "Your mother talked about you all the time," she said, settling into my kitchen as if we'd been neighbors for years. "She was so proud of you but worried too, said you gave too much of yourself to people who didn't appreciate it." That conversation led to meeting Tom and Barbara Henderson from across the street, retired teachers who invited me for dinner every Sunday. Then came Dr. Patricia Williams, a retired physician who lived 2 blocks away and needed help organizing medical supplies for the local free clinic. "Your mother mentioned you were a nurse," Dr. Williams said during our first meeting. "We could use experienced hands if you're interested in volunteering." For the first time in months, I felt useful in a way that mattered. Not as someone's obligation or burden, but as someone with skills and experience that people actually valued. My phone, the new number that only a few people had, rang occasionally. The bank, confirming my address change. Dr. Williams, asking if I could help with a particularly difficult patient at the clinic. Mrs. Chen, inviting me to her grandson's birthday party. What it didn't do was ring with Calliope's voice demanding my attention or guilt. I'd been in the cottage for almost a month when I found the second letter. I was cleaning out the desk drawers in the bedroom when my fingers touched another envelope. This one sealed and marked, "Open after you've been in the cottage for 1 month." My mother's planning was meticulous, almost unsettling in its foresight. "My dearest Della, if you're reading this, you've made the choice to leave. I'm proud of you for that courage. I know it wasn't easy. By now, you've probably met some of the neighbors. I spent 3 years getting to know them, preparing for the day when you might need them. They're good people who understand the value of family that you choose, not just the one you're born into. There's something else you need to know. The cottage isn't just yours. The entire property is, including the 2 acres behind the house that you probably haven't explored yet. Walk to the back fence line. You'll find a gate with a 3rd key. Check the small drawer at the bottom of this desk. What you'll find beyond that gate is my final gift to you. You were always meant for more than cleaning up other people's messes, my dear daughter. It's time to remember who you were before you became what everyone else needed you to be. All my love, Mother P.S. Don't let Calliope's phone calls change your mind when they come. And they will come. I found the 3rd key exactly where she'd said it would be. It was smaller than the others, delicate and old-fashioned, with a tiny tag that read, "Future." The walk to the back fence revealed a property I hadn't fully appreciated. The cottage sat on a slight hill, with the land sloping gently down toward a wooded area. The gate was almost hidden by overgrown vines, but the key turned easily in the well-maintained lock. Beyond the gate was a greenhouse, not just any greenhouse, but a beautiful, well-equipped space with raised beds, automatic watering systems, and enough space to grow anything I could imagine. Attached to it was a small workshop with potting benches, tools, and storage for supplies. A hand-painted sign hung above the entrance, "Della's Garden." I stood there for 10 minutes, just breathing. My mother had remembered. Somehow, through all the years of me being a nurse, a wife, a mother, she'd remembered that I'd once dreamed of having a garden, that I'd talked about growing my own vegetables and flowers, maybe even selling them at farmers' markets. That dream had died somewhere between night shifts and Calliope's endless needs, buried so deep I'd forgotten it myself. Inside the greenhouse, I found one more envelope propped against a bag of potting soil. The seeds are in the workshop. Spring is coming sooner than you think. That evening, I called Dr. Williams and asked if the free clinic needed fresh vegetables. Her laugh was delighted. Della, we've been buying produce from the grocery store for our patients' food bags. Fresh, locally grown vegetables would be wonderful. Do you think you could manage something like that? I looked out my kitchen window toward the greenhouse, already planning what I would plant first. Tomatoes, certainly. Lettuce and herbs. Maybe some flowers to brighten the clinic's waiting room. I think I can manage that, I said. The next morning, I was in the greenhouse sorting through seed packets when my old phone, the one I'd left in a drawer but hadn't thrown away, rang with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mother? Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Calliope's voice was different, smaller somehow, less commanding. How did you get this number? I asked calmly. I hired someone to find you. Mother, we need to talk. Derek left me. I set down the packet of tomato seeds and sat on the potting bench. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Because it's your fault. He said I was too selfish, too demanding. He said watching how I treated you showed him who I really was. Her voice cracked. He said he couldn't live with someone who would throw their own mother away. The irony wasn't lost on me. Calliope was learning the same lesson I had, that people show you who they are and eventually, others notice. Mother, I need money. I can't afford the house payments on my own, and Derek took half of everything when he left. I know you have money hidden somewhere. I know you weren't as poor as you pretended to be. There it was, the real reason for the call. Not apology, not regret, not a desire to repair our relationship. Money. I don't have any money to give you, Calliope. Don't lie to me. You couldn't have afforded to move out unless you had something saved. And that cottage, someone's paying for it. I know you, Mother. You've been hiding money from us. No, I said quietly. I've been hiding from you. There's a difference. What's that supposed to mean? I looked around the greenhouse, at the seeds waiting to be planted, at the future my mother had preserved for me against all odds. It means I'm done being your emergency fund. I'm done being your backup plan when your real life falls apart. You're 32 years old, Calliope. Figure it out. You can't be serious. I'm your daughter. Yes, I said, feeling the weight of that truth settle around me like a blanket. You are. And it's time I started treating you like one instead of like a child who needs constant rescuing. I hung up before she could respond and turned off the phone. Then I went back to my seeds, planning a garden that would feed people who actually needed it. 3 months after moving to the cottage, I'd settled into a rhythm I hadn't known was possible. My days began with coffee in the greenhouse, checking on seedlings that were already showing promising green shoots. The free clinic had become a second home, where my nursing experience and fresh vegetables made me genuinely welcome. For the first time in years, I felt valuable in ways that had nothing to do with my bank account. Then Calliope discovered what the cottage was really worth. I was transplanting tomato seedlings when Mrs. Chen appeared at the greenhouse door, her usually cheerful face creased with concern. Della. Dear, there's a young woman at your front door. She's been pounding for 10 minutes and seems quite upset. Says she's your daughter? I sighed and wiped my hands on my gardening apron. I'll handle it. Calliope was pacing on my front porch like a caged animal, her phone pressed to her ear. When she saw me, she ended her call abruptly. Mother, we need to talk. Right now. She looked different. Thinner, with dark circles under her eyes that even expensive concealer couldn't hide. Her clothes were still designer, but they hung differently on her frame, as if she'd lost weight from stress rather than intention. We talked 3 months ago, I said calmly. You wanted money. I told you I didn't have any to give you. You lied to me. Her voice was sharp, accusatory. Do you know what I've been going through? I lost the house, Mother. I had to move into a 1-bedroom apartment. I've been working as a receptionist just to pay rent. Working. The word seemed foreign coming from her mouth. In 32 years, Calliope had never held a job for longer than a few months, always finding reasons why each position was beneath her. I'm sorry you're struggling, I said, and part of me genuinely was. Not sorry enough to fix it for her, but sorry that it had come to this. Are you? Because I just got off the phone with a real estate appraiser. Her eyes glittered with something between triumph and desperation. This cottage, this land. Do you know what it's worth? My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. It's my home. It's sitting on prime development land? The whole area is being rezoned for commercial use. This property is worth almost $3 million. She was practically vibrating with excitement now. We could sell it and split the money. You could buy a nice condo somewhere and I could get my life back. $3 million. The number hung in the air between us like a challenge. I'd known the area was growing, had seen the new businesses opening along the main road, but I'd never thought about what that meant for property values. The cottage isn't for sale, I said quietly. Calliope's face flushed red. Don't be ridiculous. You can't just sit on this kind of money while your own daughter struggles to pay rent. I can, actually. It's my property. But I'm your family. I'm your only child. The words came out in a rush, desperate and raw. After everything I've been through, after Derek left me, after losing everything, you're just going to let me suffer while you play in your little garden? There it was. The same entitlement that had driven her to put my photo in the trash. The same assumption that my purpose in life was to solve her problems. Calliope, I said, sitting down on the porch steps. Sit with me for a minute. She remained standing, arms crossed, but she was listening. Do you remember when you were 7 and you wanted a bicycle? A pink one with streamers on the handlebars? Her frown deepened. What does that have to do with anything? I worked double shifts for 2 months to buy you that bike. I was so tired I could barely stand, but I wanted to see your face Christmas morning. I looked up at her. Do you remember what you said when you unwrapped it? Calliope shifted uncomfortably. I was 7, Mother. I don't remember every... You said it was the wrong shade of pink. You cried because Sarah Henderson had gotten a bike with a basket, and yours didn't have one. I paused, letting the memory settle. I went back to the store that afternoon and bought you a basket, and streamers that were the right shade of pink. I was a child. You were. But you're not anymore. I stood up, brushing off my jeans. You're 32 years old, and you're still expecting me to fix everything that's wrong in your life. You're still crying because someone else got a better basket. Calliope's hands clenched into fists. That's not fair. This is different. This is about family taking care of family. No. This is about you wanting me to sacrifice my security for your convenience. Again, I met her gaze steadily. I spent 30 years doing that. I'm done. So you're just going to let me lose everything? You're going to sit here in your perfect little cottage while your daughter becomes homeless? The manipulation was so familiar it was almost comforting in its predictability. But I'd learned something in these months of peace. Guilt only worked if you let it. You're not going to be homeless, I said calmly. You have a job. You have an apartment. You have all the same opportunities everyone else has to build a life. But you could make it so much easier. Yes, I could. And then what? In 5 years, when you've spent your share and made bad decisions, would you be back here asking for more? Calliope's silence was answer enough. The cottage isn't for sale, I repeated. Not to developers, not to anyone. This is my home. Fine. Her voice was cold, controlled. But don't think this is over. I'll contest the ownership. I'll hire lawyers. You can't just hide behind some mysterious inheritance forever. She turned and walked toward her car, her heels clicking sharply against the stone walkway. At the driver's door, she paused and looked back. I hope your garden is worth losing your only daughter over. I watched her drive away, then went back to the greenhouse where my tomato seedlings waited. Mrs. Chen appeared a few minutes later with a cup of tea and a worried expression. Everything all right, dear? I accepted the tea gratefully. It will be. But as I worked among my plants that afternoon, Calliope's words echoed in my mind. She would be back. She'd try to find a way to force the sale, to claim some legal right to the property or my mother's estate. It was time to make sure she couldn't. That evening, I called the lawyer who'd handled my mother's estate. Mr. Patterson, it's Della Morrison. I need to discuss some changes to my will. 6 months later, I was harvesting the first tomatoes from my greenhouse when the process server arrived. Calliope had made good on her threat. She was contesting my mother's will, claiming undue influence and demanding her rightful share of the inheritance she'd only recently discovered existed. I read the legal papers while sitting in Harold's chair, my coffee growing cold on the side table. The language was aggressive, painting me as a manipulative daughter who had somehow convinced my elderly mother to hide assets from her loving granddaughter. It would have been funny if it weren't so predictably desperate. Mr. Patterson arrived that afternoon, his expression a mixture of concern and barely concealed amusement. "She doesn't have a case," he said, settling into my kitchen with a briefcase full of documents. "Your mother was extremely thorough. Every decision was documented, every legal requirement met. But fighting this could drag on for years and cost you considerable legal fees." "Or?" I asked, because I could hear the alternative in his voice. "Or we implement the plan your mother put in place for exactly this scenario." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder I'd never seen before. "Your mother anticipated this, Della. She set up a trust with very specific instructions about what to do if Calliope ever tried to claim the property." The trust documents were as meticulous as everything else my mother had planned. If anyone contested the will within the first 5 years, half of the property's value would be donated to local charities, specifically the free clinic where I'd been volunteering and the food bank that served the area's elderly population. The other half would remain mine to use as I saw fit, but the cottage itself could never be sold or developed. "She was protecting you from having to make this choice yourself," Mr. Patterson explained, "and protecting the cottage from being destroyed." I thought about my mother, planning this elaborate safety net while I'd been obliviously trying to please a daughter who saw me only as an obstacle to her inheritance. The depth of her foresight was staggering. "How long before the trust kicks in?" I asked. "I can file the paperwork tomorrow. Calliope will receive notification within the week." "Do it." 3 days later, my phone rang. The new number I'd given only to close friends and medical contacts. Somehow, Calliope had found it again. "What did you do?" Her voice was raw, furious. "My lawyer says you're giving away half the money to charity." "I'm not giving away anything," I said calmly, watching a cardinal build its nest in the oak tree outside my window. "I'm following the terms your grandmother set up to protect the property from exactly what you're trying to do." "She can't do that. She's been dead for 3 years. Dead people can do quite a lot, actually, if they plan ahead." The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we'd never said to each other. Finally, Calliope spoke again, her voice smaller now, defeated. "I don't understand why you hate me so much." The words hit deeper than her anger had. I closed my eyes, remembering the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she was scared, before she learned that tears could be weapons and love could be currency. "I don't hate you, Calliope. I'm just tired of being your solution to problems you create for yourself." "So, this is it? You're really going to let lawyers and dead people destroy our relationship?" "Our relationship was destroyed the day you put my photo in the garbage. This is just the paperwork." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet cottage and felt something I hadn't expected. Grief. Not for Calliope. She'd made her choices and would have to live with them. But for the mother I'd been, the one who'd thought love meant saying yes to everything, fixing every problem, absorbing every disappointment. That woman had died slowly over 30 years, suffocated by her own generosity. But here, in this cottage my mother had saved for me, I'd learned to breathe again. 2 weeks later, the legal papers were finalized. $1.5 million went to the charities my mother had chosen, enough to expand the free clinic and ensure the food bank could serve twice as many families. The other half remained in my accounts, more money than I'd ever imagined having. I used some of it to travel, something I'd always dreamed of but never had time for. I saw the gardens of England, the markets of Provence, the coastline of Maine. I sent postcards to Mrs. Chen and Dr. Williams, to the friends who'd welcomed me into their lives without expecting anything in return. When I came back to the cottage, I found it exactly as I'd left it. Peaceful, secure, mine. The garden had flourished in my absence, tended by neighbors who understood that some things were worth protecting. I was watering my tomatoes one evening when a car pulled into the driveway. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Calliope. But it was a young woman I didn't recognize, maybe 25, with Calliope's blonde hair but kinder eyes. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Emma, Calliope's, your granddaughter." I set down my watering can, studying this stranger who carried my blood. "I didn't know Calliope had a daughter." Emma's smile was tentative. She gave me up for adoption when I was born. I found her a few months ago, right around the time she was going through her divorce. Of course. Another secret, another complication in Calliope's carefully curated life. What can I do for you, Emma? I heard about what happened between you two, about the lawsuit and everything. She hesitated, then took a breath. I wanted to meet you before I decided whether to have a relationship with her. I thought maybe you could help me understand what kind of person she really is. I looked at this young woman, my granddaughter, and saw something I'd never seen in Calliope's eyes. Genuine curiosity rather than calculation. Would you like some tea? I asked. It's a long story. As we sat in my kitchen, Emma listening with the focused attention Calliope had never shown, I told her the truth. Not the sanitized version I'd always given, but the real story of love that had become manipulation, of generosity that had become exploitation. She asked me for money, Emma said when I finished, to help with legal fees, said you'd stolen her inheritance and she needed to fight for what was rightfully hers. And what did you tell her? Emma smiled, and for the first time I saw a resemblance, not to Calliope, but to myself at her age. I told her I'd rather get to know my grandmother first. 6 months later, Emma moved into the small apartment above the garage that my mother had apparently planned for exactly this purpose. She worked at the free clinic, studied nursing in the evenings, and helped me expand the garden into a small business that supplied fresh produce to 3 local restaurants. On quiet evenings, we sat on the porch and talked about everything: her adoptive family, her dreams, the strange twists of fate that had brought us together. She never asked about inheritance or money. She just wanted to know me. I never heard from Calliope again directly, though Emma mentioned occasionally that her birth mother had moved to another state, still convinced that the world owed her something she'd never quite received. 1 year after the lawsuit was settled, I established a small scholarship fund for nursing students. Not the grand gesture Calliope would have made to garner attention, but something practical that would help young people like Emma build meaningful careers. As I signed the paperwork, I thought about my mother and her elaborate plan to save me from my own family. She'd seen what I'd been too close to see, that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go. I kept the other half of the money for myself, just as she'd intended, not out of selfishness, but because she'd wanted me to learn that I deserved security, comfort, and the freedom to choose my own path. On my 70th birthday, Emma surprised me with a small party in the garden. Mrs. Chen brought her famous cookies, Dr. Williams shared stories from the clinic, and the neighbors I'd come to love gathered around the table Harold and I had shared for so many years. As the sun set through the oak trees, painting everything in shades of gold, I realized my mother had given me more than a cottage and financial security. She'd given me the chance to discover who I was when I wasn't busy being what everyone else needed. And that woman, it turned out, was someone worth knowing. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.